Brother-in-law's truck was parked in my parents' driveway. That was the first thing I saw when I turned off the highway onto Lakeview Crescent. His black F-150 with the cracked taillight he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. Just sitting there, engine probably still warm, like it belonged. It didn't belong. My parents didn't know I was coming. Nobody did. I pulled over about 30 meters down the road and just sat there with my hands on the wheel. The heat was off because I'd been driving with the windows down. It was one of those early October mornings in Nova Scotia where the cold hasn't fully committed yet, where the air smells like wood smoke and the leaves are halfway between orange and gone. I'd been looking forward to this drive for 6 months. I'd been looking forward to this moment for longer than that. I turned the engine off. I didn't move. My sister had no reason to be at that house. Neither did her husband. My parents were supposed to be in Wolfville that morning. I'd arranged the whole thing through my cousin, who told them there was a family lunch, a small thing, casual. I needed them out for 4 hours so the property manager could do a final walkthrough before I arrived with the keys. The house had been ready for 3 weeks. I'd just been waiting for the right day. 35 years of marriage, that was the right day. I need to go back a little, because none of this makes sense without the context, and I want you to understand exactly what I mean when I say I built my parents a house. I don't mean I hired someone and wrote a check and showed up at the end. I mean I spent 4 years making this happen. I mean I missed vacations and drove a 10-year-old Civic and said no to things I wanted so I could say yes to this one thing. My parents immigrated from the Philippines in the early 90s. My dad worked construction for 15 years. He still has the back problems to prove it. And my mom cleaned offices downtown until she got a permanent position with the school board as an educational assistant. They raised 3 kids in a rented semi-detached in Dartmouth. They never complained. They also never owned property. In Canada, the way housing costs moved while my parents were trying to get stable, ownership felt like something that happened to other people. They rented their whole lives, and they made it work, and they never made us feel like we were missing something. But I knew what it cost them, not in money, but in the quiet way my dad would sometimes stand at the window of whatever place we were living in and just look out at the yard. It wasn't his yard. He couldn't plant anything permanent. He couldn't put up a fence or change the flooring or do any of the small things that make a place feel like yours. I'm an occupational therapist. I made decent money, not extraordinary money, but steady, and I've always been careful with it. When I was 26, I started putting money aside into a separate account I called, in my own head, the house fund. I didn't tell anyone. Not my husband, not my sister, not my parents. I just built it slowly. By the time I was 31, between savings and a small inheritance from my Lola that I'd specifically set aside for something meaningful, I had enough for a down payment on a modest property. I found the lot through a realtor friend. It was on a lake about 45 minutes outside of Halifax. Not huge, not flashy, but the water was clean and the lot had mature trees and there was a small dock already in place that just needed repairs. I bought the lot first, then contracted the build. A 2-bedroom cottage, single story because my dad's knees are not what they were, wide doorways, a covered porch that ran the full length of the front, a wood stove in the living room. Every decision I made thinking about them. The grab bars in the bathroom, installed properly, not as an afterthought. The kitchen counters at a height my mom could actually work at comfortably. The bedroom window positions so you could see the water from bed. Total cost, by the time we were done, $340,000. Land, build, furnishings, dock repair, 1 year of property tax prepaid, and a small contingency fund I set up to cover maintenance for the first several years. I put the property in my parents' names, jointly, with right of survivorship. I talked to a real estate lawyer about this before I did it. I'd read enough comment sections to know that people have opinions about this, and I wanted to understand my options. She walked me through life estate arrangements, irrevocable trusts, different structures. In the end, I chose to put it directly in their names because that's what felt right. This was theirs, not mine to hold on to. If something happened to one of them, the other would have full ownership without any legal complications. I set up a dedicated account for ongoing property taxes and maintenance costs, with enough in it to cover 15 years at current rates. I wanted it to be clean. I wanted them to have something that was genuinely, fully theirs. I also, and this is the part that matters for what happened next, kept every single document. The purchase agreement for the land, the build contract, every invoice, every payment receipt, every correspondence with the contractor. the deed, the title insurance, the certificate of occupancy, the registration documents from the land titles office. I kept all of it organized in a folder on my laptop and a physical copy in a binder that I carried with me everywhere in the weeks leading up to this. I didn't bring that binder because I expected trouble. I brought it because I'm that kind of person. I'm the one who keeps receipts, who reads the fine print, who sates confirmation emails. My husband calls it my anxiety superpower. I just call it being prepared. So when I saw that truck in the driveway, I was glad I had it. I sat in my car for maybe 3 minutes. Then I got out, grabbed the binder off the back seat, and walked up to the front door. I could hear voices before I even reached the porch. My brother-in-law's voice, mostly. He's the kind of man who fills a room with sound even when he's trying to have a quiet conversation. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was wrong. It had that particular edge that I'd learned to recognize over the 8 years my sister had been married to him. The edge that meant he'd already decided something and was in the process of making everyone else agree. I opened the front door. I hadn't locked it yet because the property manager had done the walkthrough that morning and left it for me. The three of them were standing in the living room. My sister was near the window. My brother-in-law was in the center of the room with his phone in his hand and a look on his face that I can only describe as proprietary, the look of someone taking inventory. My dad was standing near the kitchen doorway with his arms at his sides, and his hands were shaking slightly. Not from cold. My dad doesn't shake from cold. He shakes when he's overwhelmed and trying not to show it. My mom saw me first. Her face did something complicated that I didn't fully process until later. Relief, I think. But also a kind of bracing, like she was preparing herself for what came next. "Hey," I said. Just that. I looked at my dad first, then at my sister, then at my brother-in-law. He barely glanced up from his phone. "Oh good, you're here. We need to talk about the listing." I didn't say anything. I was stirring a pot of tomato soup on a Tuesday afternoon when my uncle sent me a voice note. Split 4 and 15, 1,600 a week in summer. Split 4 ways, that's real money. I looked at my sister. She was looking at the floor. "Split 4 ways," I repeated. "Well, it's a family property." He finally looked up. He had the particular competence of a man who has never really been told no in a way that stuck. "Your parents are getting older. They're not going to want to manage a property. We can handle the rental side of things, take a management fee, and everybody benefits." "It's already listed," my dad said, very quietly. "He listed it this morning." My brother-in-law shrugged in a way that was supposed to look casual. "Just a soft listing, to test the market." Nothing confirmed. I looked at my dad. His hands were still shaking slightly. 35 years he'd worked and saved and tried, and this moment that was supposed to be something good, something just for him and my mom, had already been turned into a line item in someone else's spreadsheet before they'd even had a chance to sit on the porch. I set the binder down on the kitchen table. I opened it. "I'm going to need you to take the listing down," I said. "Today, right now actually." My brother-in-law laughed. Not a mean laugh, almost genial. The way he gets when he thinks he's about to explain something to someone who doesn't understand. "Look, I get that you put money into this. That's great, that's really generous. But legally, it's your parents' property. They can do what they want with it. And if they want to, they haven't said they want to do anything." I found the deed, pulled it out, set it on the table. "And you're right that it's their property. That's the point. It's theirs, not the family's, not yours. Theirs. We're family. You're my sister's husband." I kept my voice level. "You don't appear anywhere on this deed. You have no legal standing here. And the rental agreement you've listed, which I'm assuming is in your name or my sister's name, not my parents' names, would be a contract entered into by someone who has no ownership interest in this property and no authority to rent it." He opened his mouth. "That's not an opinion," I said. "That's property law. I'd encourage you to confirm it with a lawyer if you'd like, but I've already spoken to one, and I'm happy to share her contact information." The room was quiet for a moment. My sister finally looked up from the floor. "Renata," she said. My name in her mouth sounded tired. Nobody was trying to. "The listing needs to come down today." I looked at my brother-in-law, not my sister. "If it's not down by the end of the day, my parents will be filing a complaint with the rental platform and consulting with a lawyer about unauthorized representation of a property. I have every document here to support that." He looked at the binder. He looked at the deed. He looked at me. Something shifted in his face. The genial confidence drained out of it, replaced by something smaller and less comfortable. Fine, he said. He put his phone in his pocket. Fine, I'll take it down. He walked out to the porch. A minute later, I heard the door of the F-150 close. My sister stood there for a moment. I waited. I didn't know he was going to do that, she said finally. I found out this morning. I came to try to stop it. I believed her, actually. That's the complicated thing about my sister. She's not a bad person. She just married someone whose first instinct in any situation is to look for leverage. And she spent 8 years learning to work around him instead of against him. And sometimes that means she's in the room but not on the right side of things until it's almost too late. I know, I said. She looked around the room. Really looked. Maybe for the first time since she'd arrived. The wood stove, the view through the front window, the lake catching the October light. The small details I'd spent months thinking about. It's beautiful, she said quietly. It is, I agreed. My mom made tea. That's what my mom does. She makes tea. She found the kettle where I'd set it up in the kitchen, found the mugs, found the tea I'd stocked in the cabinet above the stove, and she made tea like she'd been making tea in that kitchen for years. My dad went out to the porch. I let him go. I gave him a few minutes. Then I went out and stood beside him at the railing. The lake was very still that morning. The kind of still that makes you feel like you're the only people left in the world. In a good way. The trees on the far bank were full color, deep red and amber and a yellow so bright it looked almost electric. A loon called from somewhere out of sight. My dad didn't say anything for a long time. I didn't either. We've always been able to do that, him and me. Sit in silence without it feeling like something is missing. Finally, he said, "You didn't have to do this. I know, this is too much." "It's exactly enough," I said. I measured. He laughed. A small sound, but real. He looked out at the water. When I was little, back home, we had a mango tree in the yard. My dad planted it. He always said, "A man who plants a tree is a man who believes in tomorrow." He stopped. Looked at the dock, at the water, at the tree line. "I'm going to plant something here," he said. "In the spring." I didn't trust myself to say anything to that, so I just put my hand on his arm and we stood there while the loon called again from somewhere across the water. The lease listing was down by 3 o'clock that afternoon. My brother-in-law texted me a screenshot confirmation. No message, just a screenshot. I filed it in the binder with everything else. My sister stayed for dinner. She and my mom cooked together in the kitchen, something with rice and dried fish that my mom had brought from home, filling the whole cottage with a smell that felt, somehow, exactly right for a first evening. My brother-in-law did not stay for dinner. After my sister left, after the dishes were done, my parents sat together on the porch in the 2 Adirondack chairs I'd set up facing the water. I watched them from inside through the glass door for a moment before I got in my car. My dad had his hand on my mom's arm. They weren't talking. They were just sitting there, in their chairs, on their porch, looking out at their water. I've thought a lot, since that day, about what my brother-in-law said. About family property. About how a thing that belongs to someone can suddenly be reframed as something communal the moment there's value in claiming it. About how quickly someone can walk into a space and start measuring it for their own purposes before the people it was made for have even had a chance to sit down. I think about the listing he put up. $1,500 a week, split 4 ways. And I think about my dad standing in the living room with his hands shaking, 35 years after he arrived in this country and built a life with no safety net and no inheritance and no one to plant a tree for him. And I think about how close that morning came to becoming something else entirely. But it didn't. That's the thing. It didn't. My parents spent their first full weekend at the cottage 3 weeks later. My dad called me on the Sunday evening. He didn't say much. He told me the neighbor across the inlet had waved to him from a kayak that morning. He told me he'd identified 3 types of birds from the porch. He told me the water was very cold, but he put his feet in anyway. Then he said, "I think I'll put in a raised bed on the south side of the porch, where the sun is good, in the spring." I told him that sounded like a great idea. He said goodnight. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store where I'd pulled over to take the call, and I cried a little, the way you cry when something has finally landed the way you always hoped it would. And then I drove home. A boundary isn't a wall. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. What I built wasn't a fortress to keep anyone out. It was a door that opens for the people it was made for and stays closed for everyone else. My parents deserve to have that. They deserved a place that asks nothing of them, that doesn't come with conditions or negotiations or someone else's plans already penciled into the calendar. My dad is going to plant something in the spring. He believes in tomorrow. So do I.